Hi, everyone. I'm Tamron Hall. The News Nation is following big breaking news in the Trayvon Martin case. The Florida state attorney has announced that a grand jury will investigate the 17-year-old's killing. In a statement, Norm Walfinger said, quote, "I share in the desire of the family and the community to accurately collect and evaluate all the facts surrounding the tragic death of Trayvon Martin." Now, this comes as police released new 911 calls late yesterday made by George Zimmerman, the man who shot Martin. Now, those calls were made over the past 6 months. Now, keep in mind, this is before the shooting itself involving Trayvon Martin. Sanford police say Zimmerman called them 46 times since January of 2011, reporting suspected break-ins, suspicious people, and other incidents. Police released 6 calls, and in 4 of them, Zimmerman reported suspicious men in the neighborhood.
What do they look like? Are they white, black, or Hispanic?
Black males, 2 black males in their late teens. One's wearing a black white beater, black tank top, and black shorts, and the other one's wearing a black shirt and blue jeans. And they're at the back gate of the neighborhood.
Now, here's a portion of another call released by police where Zimmerman is reporting 2 people he says he's never seen before. Take a listen.
We've had a lot of break-ins in our neighborhood recently, and I'm on the neighborhood watch. And there's 2 suspicious characters at the gate of my neighborhood. I've never seen them before. I have no idea what they're doing. They're just hanging out, loitering.
Meantime, the Justice Department confirms it is, of course, getting involved, launching its own investigation, and will meet with local leaders to address tensions in the community. Now, the Congressional Black Caucus had asked the Justice Department to look into the case as a potential hate crime. And joining me now is the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, Democratic Congressman Emanuel Cleaver of Missouri. Chairman, thank you so much for your time. First, let me get your reaction to the fact that the Department of Justice is now getting involved, and they also want to address what is so obvious, the tensions in the community in Florida and beyond at this point regarding this case.
Well, we believe that it's very appropriate for the Justice Department to become involved in this case because the situation has become highly volatile and because we think that a hate crime was committed. And I've got to tell you that unlike days of old when things like this happened, we just had mainly African Americans out expressing outrage. Now we have people from all walks of life who I think have trained their hearts to be sympathetic to injustice. And so we're seeing people, even here in Washington, having people coming up, white, black, Hispanic, Republicans, all saying, you know, something is wrong here. So the Justice Department had to get involved because the local police department obviously had some problems of its own. And ultimately, they need to look into that. The reason we think that this is a hate crime, if you listen to the tape, which I have refused to do anymore because it hurts too much for me, I can imagine what the family's going through, is the fact that the one thing that the man said over and over and over, it is a black man, it is a black kid. I mean, everything was black. And then he said the magic words, "They always get away with it." So I think that I'm not a judge and jury, but I think that those who can do that kind of thing, can bring things to a judge and jury, are now moving in that direction. So the Congressional Black Caucus is pleased at the response of the U.S. Department of Justice, and not only because they're looking into the case, but because they're going to try to quell some of the understandable anger that is boiling up in the community.
Chairman, one of the reasons you point to why you believe that this should be investigated as a hate crime is because you say, as we've heard in this tape, Trayvon Martin is described as a black man. On the 911 calls that were just released, Zimmerman is asked to identify, describe. If anyone's ever called 911, they know that the operator asks you to describe. I have to note here that of the 6 calls that were released by police today, 4 of them Zimmerman identifies the individual as an African-American or a black person. Now, that is not to say that in the dozens of other calls that he made that the other suspects were not white, Hispanic, male, female, but in these calls released by authorities, 4 of the 6, as I understand it, were minorities. With that said, just because he describes the individual as being black, how does that then lead to a hate crime?
They always get away with it. They who? I mean, I'd like to have the answer to that question, they who? I also think that it's important for us to understand that it's very easy to generate suspicion based on race. Now, we're going to get beyond it as a nation. I know the time is coming, but we're not there yet. And I think that even a casual observer can look at this situation, listen to this poor kid screaming for help, and this man executing him allegedly, if all the facts are true. And so it's difficult to see that race is not a factor, particularly when you hear the refrain, they always get away with it.
But Chairman, let me take you to this other point here. Of course, Zimmerman is the focus. He is the person who fired the gun, and now a grand jury will look at the facts here. But I've got to also bring you to the Sanford Police Department. You have so many people who equate this to famous cases in Mississippi, cases in my home state of Texas, where actions were carried out by bad people, but they were enabled by the inactive pursuit of police departments, of county sheriffs. I'm again not saying that is the case here, but how much pressure should be put on and questions placed to the Sanford Police Department?
Well, I don't think there's any question. I implied that earlier, that I think the Justice Department has to look at the police department. I'm from Texas as well, but I was mayor in Kansas City, Missouri. We've gotten over many of our problems with the police department over the years, but if a police officer has a justifiable shooting, that police officer in Kansas City, Missouri is suspended with pay until there's an investigation, even if all of the facts show that the police officer was justified in the shooting. We had a man shoot down a 17-year-old bundle of hope and potential, and he still has his gun. I mean, there was nothing done. It's like, okay, we'll see you later. The police department must, I think, receive a federal review, and if something is there, I think a grand jury ought to be brought together to look at what the police have done in terms of complicity.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much for your time. Emanuel Cleaver, greatly appreciate it. And I know you and the other members of the Black Caucus will be down there as well. Thank you. Let's take you back to at how the events unfolded in this case. Trayvon Martin was killed on February 26th. On March 8th, Trayvon Martin's father, Tracy Martin, held a news conference calling for Sanford police to arrest Zimmerman for the murder. On March 16th, Sanford police released 911 calls. On the same day, attorneys for Trayvon Martin's family held another news conference demanding an arrest. And late last night, the Justice Department announced an investigation. And today, the Florida State Attorney announced a grand jury will convene on April 10th to investigate the shooting. Now, with me now, one of the most prominent attorneys in Florida, former U.S. Attorney, South Florida, Kendall Coffey. Thank you so much for your time. Kendall, I pointed out you're one of the best. I can't stress that enough. So we want to get your thoughts first on this stand your ground law. I just got a note in from the Florida State Representative Dennis Baxley. He is one of the two sponsors of this stand your ground law. And he tells NBC News there is nothing in the stand your ground law that authorizes anyone to pursue and confront. It is a strictly self-defense bill here. As we know, George Zimmerman says he was acting in self-defense. Help us with your legal knowledge. Process what happens now.
Well, the stand your ground law has become a huge obstacle to preventing exactly this kind of self-appointed vigilantism, this kind of self-appointed vigilante justice. Because the problem is somebody shoots. It used to be that if you shot somebody, quote, in self-defense in your home, the castle doctrine protected you. But when in 2005, Florida decided to become the pioneering state to extend this kind of self-defense protection to wherever the heck you go, the problem became that somebody like a Zimmerman, unless there are witnesses that say, I saw you do it, the kid wasn't provoking you, it wasn't self-defense, unless you've got witnesses, it becomes very difficult to prove the circumstances that the shooting took place in. So cases have been defeated repeatedly where similar kinds of shooting took place. A lot of times they don't even try to bring the cases because it is so hard to get convictions unless you've got witnesses or unless the shooter shoots the victim in the the back. What you've got is no witnesses except for the alleged perpetrator who says it was in self-defense. And how do you prove that's a lie beyond a reasonable doubt?
So with that said, is that why you believe the Sanford Police Department avoided or did not bring this case to the grand jury and accepted George Zimmerman's word that he was acting in self-defense? Is that because of the difficulty that is presented with this law?
Well, the law presents a difficulty. It also presents an easy out if the police department doesn't want to get very aggressive about investigating it. Because certainly, if you have somebody's word, you can still try to break it apart through effective interrogation of the so-called suspect. And if you put that interrogation together with some kind of witness reports, people who said they heard crying or that they heard some kind of sound that sounded like it was the young man right before he was shot, if you try to put those things together, sometimes you can shake the suspect and get to the truth. The problem is, if this was a slipshod investigation of a person where there's no actual eyewitnesses who says he did it in self-defense, it could be very, very hard for anybody to get to the proof and to prove a criminal case beyond a reasonable doubt. I applaud the Justice Department's intervention. They're certainly going to look at the actions of the police department. They're certainly going to look at the possibility of hate crime. But I don't want anyone to be unrealistic in terms of expectations as to where this ends up. It may already be too late to ever get the truth or to ever get a real prosecution out of this case.
Well, Kendall, let me ask you regarding the 911 phone calls that were released, calls made by neighbors who were at least overhearing the commotion, and the call made by George Zimmerman where the operator says, do not get out of your car, do not pursue. Does that play a role in all of this, in what the grand jury will hear? Does that come into play at all?
It does come into play, and the grand jury is going to want to hear that, and they're going to want to hear from the neighbors. And they may find that it was extremely poor judgment, even reckless judgment, in continuing, as apparently Zimmerman did, to pursue the suspect. But the problem is going to be, at the end of it all, if all you can get is Zimmerman's story that he was being attacked, and the only way to contradict that is a couple people who heard things but didn't see things, from a prosecution standpoint, it becomes a very difficult case to get any kind of homicide conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. And the proof of that, sadly or not, is that in Florida, since the Stand Your Gun law was enacted, in these kind of cases, generally people don't even get prosecuted anymore. And when they have attempted to prosecute these kind of claims of self-defense, they've almost always been acquittals.
Wow. Kendall Coffey, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. I know we'll be talking with you soon. Thank you, sir.